Welcome to Saz Show, the performance edition. In today's show, our guest is Richard Norton. This guy, you know him from 80s and 90s action movies. I know him as Chuck Norris's close friend. I will not mess with Richard Norton for obvious reasons. But this man is also full of wisdom, and we want to listen to it. Stay tuned.
Yes, and we're back by popular demand with Richard Norton here and Saz Show. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being with us here again in Montreal this sunny day. And this is a beautiful day. Does it remind you of back home a little, right? Same sunny beaches, same, I don't know. What do you think about Montreal? We've been here for a while. Let's start with this.
Yeah, Montreal. Listen, I'm well aware that we do not get the levels of cold that you get here. But the summertime, when we're here for these past few months, is very much like Melbourne's weather.
So that's where you're from, Melbourne, right?
That's where I grew up.
That's where you grew up.
Yeah, I grew up in Melbourne, Australia, and I kind of moved to California in 79. So I've lived there for over 35 years now.
What prompted the move to California?
Oh, look, that gets to a whole story of where everything started. But I was doing bodyguard work. I'd mentioned in the earlier podcast I did 25 years of personal bodyguard work for some of the top rock and roll bands of the time. And I was working I did a tour with Linda Ronstadt. A lot of the younger ones won't necessarily know who Linda is, but she was definitely at the top of her game in rock and roll, country and Western music. And I did the tour with her, and she nicely asked if I'd come and work for her full-time in the US. And I remember saying at the time, I'm not so sure. I love being in Australia. Had martial arts schools all over the country, with my partner, Bob Jones. And I just wasn't keen to leave. But I remember she said to me, look, just try it. You can always go back home. I thought, you know what? Why not?
How many martial arts do you actually know and practice?
Yeah, yes, probably the correct word is practice. Well, when I was 11, I started with judo. And I remember back then, judo was about the only thing there really was in Australia, and it was literally at the back of comic books, you'd get ads, defeat 5 people with a flip of a finger and all that sort of business. And for whatever reasons, I just remember being quite intrigued by that. I mean, I've often been asked, why did you start martial arts? And, there's always people with stories of getting beaten up by the local gangs or whatever. Well, I had none of that. I grew up in a suburb of Melbourne, Croydon, and I had a really good upbringing, but we're always very physical, with the kids around in the neighborhood, boxing and all that sorts of stuff. But again, judo was what I started with. But I was very skinny, very little and very skinny as an 11-year-old. And I was pretty much like those comic book characters, with the older teenage brown belts kind of pitching me from one end of the dojo to the other. And I realized that it's still, unless you got technically excellent, it was very much a big man sport, even though they'll say otherwise. So anyway, that was my first style. And one of my friends from school, a kid called John Rowe, he was learning karate out of a book whilst we were doing judo. And it was Maso Oyama's book, it was one of the very first books out with Kyokushin Karate. And he was learning the book. Anyway, he happened at the class one day and he said, there's a karate school opening up near to where I lived in Croydon, about 3 miles away. I said, wow, we've got to go and have a look. So I went along, and there was a gentleman named Tino Sebarano who was Hawaiian Filipino. And Tino had been out in Australia for maybe 6 months, and he did a demonstration at this kind of church hall in a place called Bayswater. And there was maybe half a dozen students that he just had in that 6 months. And they had a very fundamental demonstration of what we would call H-pattern forms or kata, and a little bit of non-contact sparring. And I just remember thinking, oh my God, this is what I want to do. And I immediately joined. And I also saw it as a kind of more of a stand-up, off type of fighting art where it didn't involve so much strength. Being smaller, I realized I could use a lot more agility and speed with karate, at least the way it was shown to me that day. And the style was Goju-Ryu. It's Okinawan-based karate style, though we were more Japanese sort of based under Gogen Yamaguchi. They used to nickname him the Cat, and he had his kind of hybrid Goju style. Anyway, that was the beginning of my karate career, and that really started the whole journey for me. It's funny, you look back and in hindsight, I often say to people, when you start something like martial arts, you don't know whether your instructor's good or not because you don't know anything, and it's sometimes with hindsight, after you've wasted a lot of time and money, that you find out it was a waste of time. Well, thankfully, with all the knowledge I have to date, I'm well aware that I had the best possible instructor I could ever have to start my martial arts journey. And this gets back to asking why martial arts, especially again in Australia where it was cricket and football and everything else. It was kind of an unusual endeavor.
No movies, right? You want to expose. It was way before the martial arts movies came onto the market.
All of that.
Yeah.
Yep. And I honestly believe it was just what I was meant to do with my life. And even today, I've always said that all I really ever wanted to do was be the best martial artist that I could be, and that's my through line in life. And what is it now? 55 years I've been at it, and everything good that's actually happened in my life has happened as a result of keeping that goal of just trying to be the best martial artist and having an absolute passion for the arts. And that gets back to your question of what arts do I know? Look, I've dabbled in lots of things. My judo started me, but karate would be my base. When I moved to Los Angeles in '79, I immediately started training with Chuck Norris at his house. And I had met Chuck in 1978 in Australia. Bob Jones, who was my partner in martial arts schools that we had like over 500 schools.
So judo, karate, I heard jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, well, yes, judo, karate. And when I went to the States, and I was going to say, Bob and I brought Chuck Norris out to Australia in '78. He did some demonstrations in fact, Bob was the first one to introduce kickboxing into Australia. So we had some events in the different states and wanted Chuck to travel around and demonstrate his abilities and everything, which he did. I was also demonstrating on the same card using sai and some Okinawan weapons. Point being that Chuck and I just really hit it off, got on like a house on fire, and it was Chuck who said, if you get to California anytime, look me up and we'll do some training, which you can imagine for a young kid in Australia, as I often say, back then we were a lot more isolated than today. Meaning, of course, you could still travel, but it just wasn't as accessible as it is now with different airlines and flights and the expense of it. So for me to go over and start working for Linda, of course, the first person that I called was Chuck, and that's how I started training with him every morning. And Chuck he's still just a dear friend. He was best man at my wedding to my wife, Judy.
Oh, wow.
And we just became and still are such close friends. And Chuck was just amazingly generous as a friend. He introduced me to different martial artists in the US that I could never really met. Or if I did, it would take a long period of time. But because Chuck was so well liked and respected as a martial artist, it opened the doors for me. So I started training with Benny the Jet Urquidez, who, again, a lot of younger ones won't necessarily know, but Benny's like a kickboxing legend of his day and very much an American style of kickboxing. His style was called Ukido-kan. So I started training with Benny long before he had the Jet Center, which became a famous training place in LA for fighters. I started also training with Fumio Demura, who was a traditional martial artist out in Orange County. I was training with him each day. I was training with Chuck. And so I guess going way back to your first question, my dabbling involves karate, judo, kickboxing, different martial arts weapons, etc. Been even looking into some Sistema. Martin Wheeler is a friend of mine in Los Angeles. And it's really, for me, it's just a matter of I try and taste some of the other arts, Aikido, got into that a bit in Australia, only enough to sort of hurt myself. But, I'm just sort of fascinated with all the arts, but more from a point of view now at my age of what principles do they have that can help me do what I already do a little bit better. It's not so much I want to learn a completely new art, but I just love looking at the through line of the arts, and there's so many fundamentals of the arts that are not much different to each other. How they're externalized and everything, of course, makes them different. But the body, you still got 2 arms and 2 legs, and a
Do you
head.
find more similarities now between? I know that all the martial arts, they have similar philosophy. Well, not all, but maybe a lot of them. And you'll answer that question for me. Do you find more similarities between martial arts? Like, do they all blend in at this point, or do you can still find like a distinction for you specifically?
Well, it's fun. Initially, they probably seem quite different. It's only when you actually get into them that you find a lot of similarities. I find, and it's fascinating. Like Sistema is a Russian, combat system that I got exposed to a few years ago, and it looks so contradictory to what I normally did in the way strikes are focused, which they don't, et cetera, et cetera. I won't even get into what it's all about. But it's only after getting into it, I started to realize, oh, wow, there are so many similarities even to my basic karate style, and I just find that fascinating, the different arts. And as I said, it's like I'm not a master of any of them, I get a little turned off with the title system. Okay. There's so many masters and grandmasters and everything else. And as I said to you, I feel that to be called a master, that means I've mastered that style, and I couldn't be further away from that in my mind, which I'm okay with. So because the exciting thing, like for instance, I've trained with the Machado brothers in jiu-jitsu. I've been doing that since the late 80s, started with Rickson Gracie, and eventually started training with the different Machado brothers. And I've been with Jean-Jacques Machado for 25 years now, 26 years. So 26 years, you think, wow, well, you've mastered it. But I would wrestle with Jean-Jacques today, and I'm a 4th degree black belt under him. I couldn't even come close to tapping him out once, which is ridiculous, He's that much ahead of me. Now, one could say, oh, that's a bit depressing, to think that you couldn't even do that. But the flip side for me is it's exciting because I realize, wow, how much further is there to go in this art? And that's the driving force for me. If it was something that your next door neighbor could learn in a month and be reasonably proficient, I don't believe there'd be any art, and I don't believe there'd be any particular excellence in something that's attainable in a month or 6 months or a year. I think it's that lifetime pursuit that makes it so attractive.
Can we mention your age on camera, or do you avoid that? Because, okay, this is the question. The question is, how do you stay so fit? Because like you said, you listed 55 years of your career as a martial artist, obviously, and you started, so we can put some math, together here. How do you stay in shape, other than just practicing? Like, how do you stay, what is your daily mind or diet or whatever practice? How do you, is it strictly just martial arts?
Look, I'll be 68 in January. And I can still get in with the young ones. I think I'm smart enough to know what I shouldn't do. There's a lot of things that you get enticed in doing out of ego, or that you want to show. Yeah, well, I can still do this, and I can still kick somebody in the head, or whatever it might be. I believe I'm getting enough wisdom now to go, I know I don't need to do that anymore. I want longevity with what I do. I really want to be doing my arts in 20 years from now. And I realize the only way I'm able to do that is by being smart and just not getting drawn into what we would call these suicide matches, or matches that are based on ego, having to prove who's the better. I love teaching, and I love being able to pass on my knowledge. And I also realize that if I just get in a ring and start moving around with gloves on with a 20-year-old, who out of ego wants to take my scalp, then it's going to be a price to pay for me, maybe for him.
I actually can relate to this because that's the reason why I don't play basketball anymore. I'm not in the same age category as you are, but for the same reason I don't step on the court with a bunch of young guys because they still have something to prove. Where I just want to go there and have fun, kind of thing.
Yeah, and enjoy it. Well, I still enjoy rolling and the grappling and everything else, but I'm reasonably choosy about who I'll wrestle with now. And, I've got a lot of friends that have been black belts a long time, and that's a totally safe environment for me. I know I can get on the mat and nobody's going to tweak each other's arms or try and screw your head off and everything. So that can be fun, and you can wrestle for a couple of hours on that basis. And again, the Machados have been incredible examples for me, at least in the grappling sense, that I often say with Jean-Jacques that my biggest rap for him that in 26 years or whatever, I've wrestled him thousands of times and he's never hurt me once. And yet he's had complete control over me, and I think that's an amazing thing. I also like to pass on to some of my peers that are getting older that feel like they have to go in and get on the mat and still be able to beat every one of their students, do all this. I'd say but if you do that and you get so jacked up that you can no longer train, what happens to whatever it is, 20, 30, 40 years of knowledge? You're no good to yourself and you're no good to anybody else. That's why I'm happy to get on and show people drills and sort of pass on some of my knowledge without having to feel like I've got to then prove that it works by getting on the mat with a 20-year-old. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you practice
because otherwise, and I've often used the example of Freddie Roach. Freddie Roach, is a boxing trainer who was Oscar De La Hoya's coach and Manny Pacquiao. I mean, Freddie Roach's got Parkinson's, Judy could do a round of boxing with Freddie Roach. But there's a reason that Manny Pacquiao and Oscar De La Hoya worship someone like him. It's his ability to make them the best they can be. It's his knowledge through his journey and what he's learned and his ability to pass that on to him. That's his value, It's like a Helio Gracie. Helio Gracie died, I think he was 94 years of age. And Julian, his son, said his dad was still doing his drills a year before he died. He loved it. Now, could Helio get on the mat at 90 years of age with some young purple belt, and beat him? And no, it'd be insane to even think that. What makes him the master and the head of that style is his knowledge, his journey and his ability to pass that on. And I think that's very important. So I could count on one hand the amount of people still training that started when I did, their backs are out, their necks are gone, they're hobbling around. So I think it's very important to keep sight and be realistic about your age and what that produces. I mean, this business about being competitive, if you had a school, as an example, if I'm a 40-year-old and I start a martial arts school and I have 20-year-old students, being that we all keep training, age will dictate that at some stage they will beat you. Because when I'm 60, they're 40. And when I'm 80, do you understand? And so there's a point that just becomes erroneous. They're going to beat you,
But isn't it sort of humbling for you as a master as well, that you actually taught your student well enough that now he can beat you?
Yeah, well, that's what we're always taught is the aim, is to get your students to be better than you are. Look, I don't sort of go into school thinking that my whole goal is to make that student better than me. I just doing what I do. I just want to, when I get on the mat, just teach. What the student does with that is kind of up to them. You know what I mean? That's their journey. I will try and give them all sorts of reasons why martial arts is great for their life, great for their well-being, mentally, physically, spiritually. But I'm still, if we get back to what Buckminster Fuller said, I'm still just doing what I love doing. The byproduct is other students want to learn from me, and hopefully it enriches their lives along the way. if they last a week and they drop out, so be it. You know, I can't be affected by that so much, you know. Ideally, of course, there's nothing more rewarding than having that one student out of 100 that lasts for 10 years or 20 years with you. But to sort of try and train somebody better than you, I think this is also why having a school and teaching, as you mentioned earlier, is a great impetus, because there's nothing better than having a room full of young students that are all chasing you. That's what motivates you to go, shit, I better keep learning, and I better keep in shape, and I better keep fit, you know. I don't want them catching me, you know. So that kind of serves its purpose in its own way anyway. And you were talking about age. For me, I just, again, I love weight training. You know, I've lifted weights since I was 11 years of age. Some of it because I was so skinny, you know. When I was small, I just wanted to build muscle, and I used to read Weeder magazines, you know, in the days of Arnold Schwarzenegger and all these people. And I just love the idea of lifting weights and actually building some muscle. I still weight train to this very day. I'm religious about it, not to be a bodybuilder, but as a supplement to my martial arts training. But I do know that has held my body in particularly good stead for the rigors of martial arts training. But again, my advice to anybody as they get older is just be consistent. You don't have to train like a maniac every day. Just do something. Might be 10 minutes, might be an hour, might be 2 hours, depending on how you feel. Be realistic about your age and limitations that age brings with it, how your joints feel and everything else. If you got an injury, rest it. Mind you, I'm the worst one for following my own advice, even though I tell any other student, if you got an injury, take some days off. I mean, we sort of
isn't that part of your job too? Like, especially now that you're kind of on the movie set, like you hurt yourself a little bit. The movie set doesn't wait for you, right? You gotta kind of.
Well, movies are different. Movies, it's the show must go on,
Exactly.
as they used to say on Broadway.
I kind of want to get back into a conversation we started. You from Melbourne. Where is your home now? What do you consider your home now?
Home, well, as I said, home is still Melbourne. I live in South Melbourne, just out of the city. And kind of work home is Los Angeles. But I'm really just as comfortable in either place, though I must say I spent 2 months there at the beginning of this year, and it's probably the best 2 months I can remember spending at home. It just felt so right and so comfortable to be in my home in Melbourne. And I thought, wow, if I could afford to just do this and nothing else, this is where I'd like to be. Having said that, my whole life with touring with rock and roll bands was always about being on the road, you know, Japan, America, Europe, or wherever. Movies, as you know, here I am in Montreal, you know. We were in New Zealand before this, and before that we're in Namibia doing Mad Max. So I'm also very comfortable with wherever Judy and I happen to be. That's home for us. It's like being home. We don't have children.
What was your favorite place to visit in the last years of your traveling all over the world? Like different, not necessarily where to live, but like to visit. Where would you like to go back again, other than Montreal?
I'd like to go back to Africa, but that was like 3 years ago now.
How was that experience?
Africa's always been such a.
But how's it different from Australia? You know, like
got elephants, rhinoceros. We don't have them. We got kangaroos. I loved Africa because I love animals. You know, I've always been fascinated by elephants, rhinos, you know, lion, all that sort of stuff. And I just always wanted to go there. I mean, as a teenager who didn't grow up watching Tarzan episodes on television and everything. Fascinating. So I was always just intrigued. I always wanted to go there, and I'm so glad I got that opportunity because Mad Max was shot in Namibia, you know, which is right down south of Africa. It used to be part of South Africa. We went to some game lodges and everything like that and got to ride, you know, out on horseback among zebra and giraffe and everything else. And one of the stunt guys' parents had a lodge, and, you know, we were in this lodge playing with 3-day-old lion cubs.
Wow.
And a 3-month-old lion. Went for a walk with that. And just to do that, I said, hey, how many people get to do this? By the way, that's another you're talking about through lines, and the 90-degree benefit. The benefit
Byproduct.
for me of doing a movie is that I get to do that on my weekends or something. It was just incredible.
And the people that you meet too, you meet the people. What do you learn about that? Because you've been literally all over the world and you met people from all angles, people on top of the food chain, so to speak, people that constantly presented, and people that always work behind the curtains, so to speak. What have you learned? What's your greatest lesson in terms of that in relationships, I guess?
Well, I remember going, I spent 4 years in Lithuania, 6 months out of the year for 4 years. And I was doing second unit directing and stunt coordinating, as well as acting on a very out there series called The New Adventures of Robin Hood. It was actually a Warner Brothers series that Fred Weintraub, I've done a lot of movies with, who's recently passed on. Freddie was the producer of Enter the Dragon. He wanted me to go there and do the second unit, so I did. And my stunt group, I had 12 stunt people, 6 Lithuanians and 6 Russians. And I do remember a time when I left, and I forget why I left. I think I was thinking I was going to actually do a lead in my own series, whatever it was. I mean, the feeling of camaraderie, between those stunt guys and everything, the relationships we had built. And remember that a certain amount of them, especially the Russians, couldn't speak English. But our connecting thing was martial arts, because it was all, even though it was Robin Hood and it's swords and horses, it was still about combat and everything else, and they were all martial artists. But, I mean, there were just tears, the relationship we had, it was genuine love for those people and them for me. And I do remember sort of thinking, when I thought about it, I thought, wow, it just occurred to me how politics and politicians and our leaders can cast such a, what's the word? You develop you almost develop not a hate, but a dislike.
Stereotype.
Yeah, for certain rated people, like, Russia, well, the Cold War and blah, 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 blah,
Yeah, and if you listen to the news now, Russia's going to kill you next.
Well, I mean, look at you. You're Russian, aren't you? See?
Yeah.
But I just remember thinking what a faceless sort of enemy, is depicted for us, and to go and realize that even regardless of language, we all joked, we interacted, and we just had this incredible just bond that had nothing to do with where they were from or where I was from. That was a big lesson for me, that I could go there and see that. That's, as you would probably know, that's one of the big things about travel, is bringing your realization it is a world community. We are all human beings, albeit there's a lot of aggression from certain walks of life in different parts of the world, but that's often also due to leadership and everything. I mean, we don't want to even get into politics, but for me, gets back to again the through line of martial arts. That was just, it's like music, unites so many people, so many musicians and songs and people that tour the world and play countries that have no idea of the English language or whatever, but still just have this common bond of a love for music, and that's very uniting. And for me, martial arts was the same sort of thing, I mean, I worked in Kazakhstan for 4 months.
Space station, you were trying to fly out to space.
Yeah, that's it.
That's another thing you need to conquer. Let me ask you this question. Is the Earth flat? You're not a flat earther.
Warren, to go to Kazakhstan, the only thing I knew about Kazakhstan was Borat was supposed to be from there, And we're there, in Almaty and one of the main cities and everything, and just to experience
it's very civilized. It's not like what Borat represented as.
Well, it depends where you are. In the cities, yes.
True.
But when you get out of the cities, it's like 1,000 years ago. I remember being up in these mountains for 4 days, these snow-capped mountains where Genghis Khan used to roam, with this old gentleman who was in his 80s and his son. And we were doing shooting some references and that for CGI for, visual effects and everything with eagles. He had 12 eagles, and he'd raised them since they were chicks. And he had 2 of them there, and, he's flying these birds around, and I got to, have one on my forearm and everything, and I'm thinking, oh my God, again, who gets to do this? This is where Genghis Khan ran, for God's sakes, with this gentleman that, the way he lived was he'd send the eagles out and hunt foxes and rabbits and everything, and he'd get the pelts and make hats and all sorts of stuff, and the eagle would get the meat. But again, traveling, who gets to see that, And I still get back to saying that the only reason I'm there is still because of my love for martial arts, It's not a bad thing.
You talked about your physical practice. You still practice your martial arts every morning and everything else. And physically you stay in shape by going to the gym, and your diet is pretty well balanced.
Diet's key. It really is. It's absolute key. Of course you need to train, muscles are there to be used. What you don't use, you lose, as they say. But diet, I used to be, and I say used to because because I don't feel I need to be an elite athlete at this stage of my life. So I'm trying to strike a nice balance, But I'm still very careful. I'm lucky that my wife is a vegetarian, so we eat very little meat. It's mainly fish and salads and everything like that, and not a lot of dressings and things like that. In my teens and 20s, 30s, 40s, even 50s, I loved fasting. I discovered fasting when I was a teenager. This guy, Paul Bragg, and there's still, if you go to the health food stores, there's apple cider vinegar, Bragg brand, that he started all that. And he was a big influence on me, and he had books on the miracle of fasting. And I used to, for years and years and years, I would only eat 6 days a week. I would basically have a 24-hour fast 1 day a week. And periodically I'd do a 3-day fast, which is just water, mineral water, or not mineral, but distilled water with a little bit of honey and apple cider vinegar as what they would call a toxic dissolver. And a couple of times a year I'd even do 10-day water fast where I'd have nothing but water, distilled water with a little bit of honey and cider vinegar. And I still like to fast to this day. That's been a big thing for me. And again, just
how do you deal with that being on set?
Well, that's hard. I wouldn't do a 10-day one. You would do it at a more relaxed sort of off downtime of your life. But it's easy to do a 24-hour. All you do is you eat breakfast and you don't eat lunch or dinner. That's easy. And if you just don't eat breakfast, then it becomes a 36-hour, And, it's good to try and even fast 2 days a week, which again, if you do 24-hour fast, it's not that hard to do. Basically just gives your whole body a physiological rest because, you wouldn't lift weights every day and break the muscle down, you would rest, it's about recuperation. And yet, given that we're able to and we have access to, we will put food in our mouths every day of our waking lives, with no chance for the body to do with internal cleansing and, and basically repair and everything else, and use that energy that's used for digestion to help cleanse itself, get rid of the toxins and everything else that build up in the body just by the mere nature of living in cities, with all the pesticides and insecticides and pollution and everything else.
What about meditation? Meditation is an important diet for your mind. Like, I know meditation is part of your martial arts practice, and that's before and after, but do you actually do any meditation in the morning?
It's what you said for me is key, that with the martial arts, and especially doing, in karate, they call kata training, forms training, that to me is my active form of meditation, because it's really just me and my expression of the art. It's me within my own body. I'm not sparring anybody. I'm not doing it for anybody, especially if you can find, a place of solitude to do it and everything. For me, that serves
and you just
as
really
meditation
on
for
that,
me.
Right? You just focused on katas and there's nothing else.
Yeah, but not just katas. It might be just going through some punches or some kicks or some stretching. But when you do it for you and you internalize the whole process and the whole experience, for me, that's very meditative. I can get the fundamentals and everything, and And by the way, when I say that, and I use that analogy, it's like learning music. Martial arts is like learning. You learn the scale when you learn the piano or the guitar. Do re mi fa so. Everybody learns the same scale, the same chords. Then you learn to play somebody else's song that somebody's written, that's composed. That's like doing kata or whatever for me, or the set patterns within a style. Eventually, when you spar or whatever, it's your expression of all those fundamental notes and chords and everything else. That's what makes it art. And it's okay to have all the fundamentals and then to start to go, okay, I understand how I've been taught to do these, and now I want to try and express them my way, And even Ueshiba, with Aikido, I mean, he was apparently well into his 70s before he believed he discovered real Aikido. Stuff like that's very interesting to me. He spent all his life doing it. It wasn't until his late 70s that he feels he discovered what it was. And I love that idea, as I keep getting back to that mastery and everything else is like unattainable. But doesn't mean you don't stop trying to attain it, because the journey is that's where all the lessons are.
Well, in the movies, they are fake opponents, but still the tough martial artists. Who's the toughest other than Chuck Norris? Of course, Chuck Norris is the toughest, but other than Chuck Norris, who's the toughest opponent you ever had in the movie you had a pleasure filming the scene with?
For me, probably Benny Urquidez, Benny the Jet. I mean, Benny, pound for pound, is still one of the toughest martial artists I've come across. It's not just because of his physical ability, but it's just his heart and his mindset. He's always been an incredible role model for me. I mean, there's another gentleman, Pete Cunningham, who's from Canada. I've trained with Petey for nearly 30 years now in kickboxing. He's another phenomenal martial artist, and tough. And they've both been in movies. As you know, Benny did some movies with Jackie Chan, and Jackie was just blown away with Benny's ability. Yeah, I mean, there's been a few Jackie, of course, I've done movies with Jackie Chan. It's a different area, his ability and everything else, to someone like Benny, who's ring tested, do you know what I mean? Had so many actual physical combat fights in the ring against elite opponents, that makes him stand out in my mind. Because, with martial arts, myself included, there's a lot of what we do that you believe it would work, and you hope it would work in a street fight, even though I've been, and I wouldn't say fortunate, but I've had that experience through that 25 years of bodyguarding, to have to get into physical altercations. But there's a lot of what we do that it's very theoretical. And unless you've actually been in real combat, you've battle tested your skills, you don't know whether it would really work.
So you have a different appreciation for the people that actually competed and had proved something, what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, so they've been in a battlefield, that'll be whether it's military or police or doormen, some of these people have worked on doors all their lives. I mean, goodness gracious, that's a battlefield, Even when we did doors, I was just a kid when I started doors. I was in my late teens, but it was rough. Back then we used to laugh with Australian male, if you went out, you would get drunk and get into a fight, and if you picked up a girl, that was good, but it wasn't necessary to having a good time. It was all about just getting into fights. But I want to strictly say that as much as that sounds like, oh yeah, it's a blokey thing to do, that was not my life, I was just brought up differently. Even though I worked on doors and the bodyguard, it was never really my thing to be trying to get into fights. It wasn't what I was about. But I had lots of friends that did. But the point being, some of the guys that I work with, oh my God, talk about battle tested. They knew what worked because it had to work for them. And it's very different. There's a big world, and I know we're getting off track here, but there's a big emphasis now on mixed martial arts. Now, you get the mixed martial artists, that get in the ring today, they're just phenomenal athletes, with the way they mix their arts, with the grappling, the boxing, the kickboxing, everything else. And the fact that they get in there time after time and are so battle-tested and can do that under the stress of an audience and the expectations, put on them, I think that makes him incredible and very valid in the combat sense of the arts. Again, even for me doing bodyguard work, you're really putting yourself on the line. Just every day you're out there. I work with David Bowie and, the Rolling Stones in the very beginning, and ABBA and Fleetwood Mac, Stevie Nicks, all these people. Now, just because you don't fight every day doesn't mean you're not actually still putting yourself on the front lines, because the expectation and the mindset you need to have is that any day could be the day that it's a life or death situation. It's a 1,000,000 chance it'll come to that. But I would often say to people, when I work with James Taylor, I would get some of the fans, punters, say, "Oh, why does James need a bodyguard? We love him." To which I'd say, "Well, how come John Lennon's dead?" If you ask people, "Do you remember what you were doing when this or that happened?" I was sitting in Peter Asher's office. Peter Asher was a member of a duo called Peter and Gordon, an English group that were as big as the Beatles in their day. So Peter became just a legendary, and still is actually, music producer and manager. He managed Linda Ronstadt and James Taylor, both of who I was working for. I worked with James and Linda for 14 years. But I was sitting in Peter's office, because I used to give Peter workouts and everything, help keep him fit aside from going on the road. And he's talking to James Taylor, and Peter hangs up and he says, "Wow, that was weird." James just suddenly said, "Oh, that sounded like gunshots." Well, James was on Central Park West in New York, which is where he had an apartment very close to Lennon's. And the shots that James heard while on the phone to Peter was Mark Chapman shooting and killing John Lennon, which is quite amazing to know that you're sitting there. And I still remember this, to the exact moment when that all happened. It's
an incredible moment
amazing.
In history that kind of sort of recorded in there, and you can't get it out quite.
No, and then the interesting thing with James remembered that Chapman actually came up to him the day before and asked him for an autograph. But apparently he had a list of people he was after, and Lennon being probably on the top of that list. But it's quite chilling when you hear stories like that.
What's the worst injury that you received on set?
Oh, I've been pretty lucky. I've torn ligament in my knee. I've had my nose broken. But overall, I've been pretty blessed. But also, what I've kind of done in most of mind you, when I was acting in lots of movies, did 40 plus lower budget movies. I said I did 3 with Jackie Chan, lots with Chuck and different people. Did a lot of leads myself in different countries. But then it was a little scary, or hairy. But again, I was young, and you think you're indestructible and everything else. But I was still very lucky. But for the most part of my career, I've mainly been involved in the fight aspect. I would leave, car stunts, motorcycle stunts, high falls to the people that specialize in that. As a result, I've been in a situation where I'm not exposed to the possibility of getting serious injury, even though you could argue doing fight scenes with Jackie Chan on a Hong Kong set is hairy enough in itself. But you know what I'm saying. Yeah. There's people like when we did Mad Max rolling tankers and everything. Good God, I wouldn't do that in a fit. It's not what I do, and it's not what I choose to do, even if I could or did think I could do it, That's amazing. So, no, I haven't had a lot of injuries. I've had surgeries, both my shoulders, I've had both shoulders, operated on twice, but that's not from bad training or anything else. That was from falling on it literally hundreds of times doing the Hong Kong movies, banging into concrete walls, falling on concrete floors. People forget when you do these falls, they say, well, you know how to break fall in martial arts, but as you would know in a movie, you can't break fall. You're supposed to fall like a bag of shit when you get punched and hit the ground. That's part of the gig and everything. But I stripped all the cartilage off the bone and everything, and I had all these fragments floating around, causing inflammation, everything else. So I had them operated on. I've had my lower back, with, some work done on that. But listen, considering my age and the fact that I can still do what I can do, I have no complaints, let's get on with it.
Is there a book in the plate?
Yeah. There is, but God knows when it'll actually get finished. I've been kind of writing a book on and off for maybe 8 years now. And, that came about because so many people, especially with the rock and roll, being on the road, as I said, with some of the people I toured with, you need to write a book. Because, I used to have adjoining rooms to these artists. I knew everything they did, everything they got up to. And I knew that the attraction for certain people for me to write a book is to write about all the shit that went on. I always swore I'd never do that. I was in such a confidential position by knowing everything. They befriended me, and I feel that would be an incredible betrayal. And I hate those kiss and tell books, once you stop working for somebody. And so I said, no, I would never do that. And then I thought about it and thought, what could be interesting is to write a book about lessons I have learned and I had learned from what I call people at the top of their game. And like a Mick Jagger or a Jackie Chan, or a Chuck Norris or a David Bowie. I mean, the longevity of the careers of people like that and others that I've worked with, I thought it was very interesting to have the opportunity to be around them for the years that I was, and to look back and realize how many things I learned from their behavior, and things that I could construe help give them the careers they had. But I guess what I'm also saying is also that's what the general public sees, is that stage persona, for instance, or that screen persona of an actor or a rock and roll singer or artist or musician. But what I was lucky enough to see is the person. And as I said, I absolutely realized that the one thing they had in common was their passion. A lot of the lessons that I looked at these artists, I realized that I kind of picked up in that moment of talking to them. It might be just something they said. And sometimes I realized it was years later that I said, wow, I remember when so-and-so said that. So it's a lesson I learned years later. Hence, the name that I wanted for my book was In the Moment with Hindsight. Meaning, and the idea of the book was to try and make people a little more aware of the lessons that are possible by those around them and given by those around them, and be open to learning that lesson then and there, whether it be a good lesson or a bad lesson, and hopefully then affect their own lives for the better. And I always say to people too, it's not the 2 hours on the mat that's important as far as behavior. It's the 22 hours off the mat. I mean, you really, I believe, should be a martial artist 24 hours a day, not just that 2 hours when you put a uniform on and you tie your belt and you punch around and role play, which so many of us do. It's how am I with everybody else that I interact in, with the people around me, society in general. It's all very well, as I said, to appear like the Dalai Lama on the mat and then to be a complete dick, off the mat for the other 22 hours in your private life or out in public. That's the big lesson for me. It's interesting, I'll finish off with another chapter in the book. To illustrate that, there was a gentleman named David Sanborn, who was a session musician, they called him, work on lots of albums, and he toured with James and Linda, and he was probably one of the best saxophonists, in the world. Mini saxophone he used to play. And David had polio, and when he used to play, his hand looked almost, he used to have a strap that people didn't even know to hold his hand up, that he could, press the different keys and everything. And he took up saxophone due to a doctor saying he needed to develop his lungs and everything else, and he became one of the best in the world. Anyway, cut long story short, he's one of the best in the world. So again, back to that through line of people at the top of their game. And I was watching David in a session, rehearsal, and I was sort of up in the bleachers just listening, and it struck me that the way he was playing was so different to something that I could remember hearing other people play. And we're in the tour bus, kind of long story, a bit shorter, and I said to David, David, it really intrigued me, your notes aren't like I'm normally used to hearing. They're almost like abstract, And again, cutting a long story short, which one of my favorite sort of moments, that I learned is he basically said to me, he said, well, I don't make sounds. I merely punctuate the quiet. He said, in my mind, I'm never not playing. I've always playing in my head. When you hear the noises, when I choose to externalize that sound, so you hear it and you go, oh, he's playing a saxophone, if I'm making sense. So he's a musician 24 hours a day. He's never not playing in his head. It's just, again, when you choose to externalize his art that you become aware of it. So on using the same analogy as a martial artist, you walk on the mat. For a lot of people, when you put a belt on, you put your gi on, your hakama or whatever, people go, oh, he's a martial artist. Or you throw that first punch. They go, oh, he's doing karate or he's doing boxing. But ideally, you should never not be a martial artist. All you've done in that stage is choose to externalize your art that others can appreciate what you're doing and be aware of what you're doing. But your mindset and your being is really, it should be that, again, you're never not a martial artist with the spirit and the integrity and the code of honor that goes with being that.
Sometimes when you hear something or you discover something, you're not often aware what you discovered till you come across later again.
Hence, in hindsight.
In hindsight.
And sometimes you are aware. Like I was aware right then and there of that, what he was saying. And I immediately, went, wow. That's it. We're martial artists 24 hours a day. He's a musician 24 hours a day. Art is about that, an artist, we're all artists. It's just that we externalize our art in different ways.
Any last advice for mindfulness?
Again, just be in the moment more than not. Listen, everybody needs to set goals, just the big lesson, I love Eckhart Tolle, who has a book, it's all about being in the moment and it's all about striking a balance. We all need goals. We all need to sort of see things in the future and set goals and aspirations, but also allow yourself to just be aware of what is happening right now and enjoy that, because as he would say, that's the only thing that's real anyway. Next week, next year, what you think you're going to achieve, maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. Maybe you'll get hit by a bus tomorrow. So, I used to say that people, you could walk down a beach and have the most beautiful sunset. And so many people will not even be aware of it because they're so in their heads about tomorrow's work, the rent, the fight they just had with their wife or their girlfriend or anything, and they miss this glorious sunset. And it's free. It's right there, and it's there just to enrich one's spirit and one's soul, and that's I think the big thing about being in the moment, whatever it might be, just be a little more in than not.
Perfect. We'll finish on that. Thank you, Richard.
All right, pleasure.